On behalf of Dr. Lindsay Gibson and the entire OC 6005 Scope and Methods of Research class, welcome to my content analysis presentation on a letter to the CEO of Deutsche Telekom. Before I begin my analysis, I'm going to go through a quick introduction of the case study. So 43-year-old Renee Oberman became the Chief Executive Officer of DT in November 2006 after successfully leading the mobile phone service division, T-Mobile, for 8 years, starting in 1998. He parlayed his education and experience into a small fortune by creating his own company, which bought and sold telephone answering machines. He amassed several stores and could have easily rode out over the sunset, but instead he took on what he described as a big opportunity to shape mobile phone services and not just sell somebody else's phones. As the newly appointed CEO, Mr. Oberman knew he faced some significant challenges and immediately developed a change plan that would effectively reverse the declining performance of DT. Addressing the bloated and unproductive workforce was the #1 priority for his cost-cutting plan. So Mr. Oberman immediately transitioned 50,000 employees from his fixed line division to a series of new subsidiary companies to help improve services and reduce costs. But this would require workers to accept longer hours and get paid less wages per hour, and do so by delivering better services. So by instituting this plan, Mr. Oberman sought to cut costs and improve services, which basically equated to reduced wages and longer working hours for employees, and is the basis of this analysis. So on this slide, I didn't have to, but I really needed to kind of outline an analysis process just for my understanding. So basically what I did was I took my research questions that I wanted to ask, and I used certain wording out of those questions to develop an understanding of the category that I wanted to use when I started coding my document. But in regards to category descriptions, my analysis aimed to summarize the categorical information derived from the letter. And by assembling this data into categories, I began the process of analyzing each category theme to derive meaning, and then to define the similarities and differences between the categories, and then summarize each category and provide an analysis of each point and how it is connected to others. So these categories, which are the ones from my coding document, are culture, leadership, objective, rhetorical, and subjective. Objective meaning facts, subjective, of course, opinion, just to make that clear. And then that will lead us right into our indexing or coding document. So, as for the coding data, to code the data, I watched the videos provided by Dr. Gibson and then followed the steps to categorize and populate my document with textual data. Additionally, I inserted line numbers and codes that corresponded with the textual data. The sample qualitative content analysis coding framework that you see on the slide depicts how I coded and organized my textual data into coding categories, and then assigned codes and line numbers for ease of searching and tracking of data from the letter to the CEO. In doing so, I was able to cross-check my data with the source document and decide whether or not the data was useful for my analysis and that it was of sufficient quantity and quality to perform the analysis, and to what degree. So now to my actual data analysis. In regards to category descriptions, my analysis aimed to summarize and synthesize the categorical information derived from the letter. By assembling this data by category, I began the process of analyzing each category theme and attempting to derive meaning and similarities or differences between the categories or themes. In doing so, I summarized each category and then provided an analysis of each point and how it connected to others. So my first category was culture. Now, there are many variables involved in describing and analyzing culture, especially cultures of an organization, but one way that I used was the 3 levels of analysis by Edgar Schein. In Schein's 3 levels of analysis, He outlines artifacts, which are observed behavior, espouse beliefs and values, which are ideals, goals, values, and aspirations. And then the last one, basic underlying assumptions, which are the unconscious, taken for granted beliefs and values. Now, my interpretation of the culture category is that there was deep frustration from the 48-year-old employee who wrote this letter. But culturally, if he speaks for the other employees, is that the majority of DT employees were deeply rooted in this organization and were committed to DT for many years, according to the letter. As cited in the letter, this telecom is and always has been my life. I began my career here, and it was here that I wanted to finish it. So my synthesis is that there is some degree of rhetoric in this category, but that ties into the rhetorical category. So my analysis concludes that culture is the predominant trait in this segment, and that this is just frustration seeping out when he was trying to make his point. The next category is leadership. Now, just like the culture category, I actually used a leadership process. So my assessment of the DT leadership was based on analysis using Kouzes and Posner's 5 practices of exemplary leadership. And I used this to examine the actions of the leadership prior to and during Oberman's tenure as CEO. And these 5 practices model the way, inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, and encourage the heart, were very applicable when it came to analyzing this case, because we were analyzing culture and leadership according to my categories. So my interpretation of the leadership category is that there was complacency with leadership prior to Mr. Oberman, and as indexed from page 1, lines 6 and 22, you and your predecessors was used twice in the letter, as well as pointing his fingers at the many managers, executive board members, and supervisory board members. My synthesis of all this was that the above textual data informs me that there was possibly some factual basis to his accusations. Again, there is a degree of rhetoric in this category, and that aligns to the rhetorical category that we'll get to here in a few. But because leadership is an essential element of any organization's culture, it applies with the culture category as well. More than any other category, though, this category is the one that was the center of the case letter because it involved leadership. So the next category is the objective category. And my interpretation of the objective category is that the information contained in the letter and categorized by my data indexing was that these statements were objective facts, and after cutting through all the rhetoric and frustration, there was indeed some basis for the employee's claims in the letter. As indexed from page 3, line 19, he stated, as executive board and management team for his company, you have a responsibility not only to your shareholders, but also a social responsibility to us employees. Other significant objective statements in this category was by closing down hundreds of T-punked and dismissing thousands of highly qualified staff. This statement points to evidence that there was some objective facts that initiated to the displeasure of many employees, and by identifying some objective facts helped me paint the full analysis picture. So my synthesis, my analysis of the above textual data has me believe that there was some factual basis to the employee's accusations, and as stated previously, there's plenty of evidence associated with this employee's comments in the letter, and by identifying these facts, I conclude that he was justified in his comments, albeit he did have way too much rhetoric embedded in the letter. Had he just stuck to the facts and made recommendations, I believe it would have been more powerful. But since many employees are frustrated and needed to vent, this letter and its rhetoric was exactly what they wanted to hear, and therefore I make the connection of this category with culture and leadership, as well as the rhetorical category, because they all line and fuse together to complete a full picture, and without a connection between all of them, it would just be a vanilla letter. So now on to that rhetorical category that I had mentioned previously. So my interpretation of this is that, one, it is pretty straightforward. The content within this index or this category is that of just pure raw emotion, anger, and rhetoric. All these index statements support a frustrated employee who was making valid points but got caught up in anger and frustration while writing the letter. For example, as indexed on page 2, the vultures are already waiting for the bits you will leave behind, killing of the last few employees still remaining. He went on to say also in line 17, do you really think we are so stupid to praise you for it? And of course, the do you really think we are so stupid is the title of the case. So my synthesis is this. Initially, it seemed like the purpose of the employee's letter to the CEO was to air his frustration and anger rather than elicit any real information or action. But after going through the analysis process, it was very clear that the employee had some valid concerns, and the purpose of this letter was to persuade leadership to make favorable decisions on behalf of the employees. Again, had he stuck to the facts and limited the rhetoric, I think the letter would have been accepted more positively, but in the end, it did seem to fulfill its purpose. And last, but certainly not least, is the subjective category. The statements made in this category are opinion-based and subjective at best. Their derived meaning was apparently influenced by personal feelings and not based on facts. For example, on page 1, line 9, we have more commitment in the company in our little fingers than the entire management squad together. Now, he doesn't know this, what the leadership's commitment is to the company, so that's a very subjective statement. So my synthesis is that this entire subjective category is more opinion-based than objective. So unless the author of this letter backs up his statements with facts, then most leaders would stop reading it once the first insult or unsubstantiated claim was launched. Fortunately, he did make enough objective statements to tie the entire letter together, albeit still too much rhetoric for my taste, but apparently not for the DT employees who were delighted that someone finally had the courage to say what needed to be said. So in summary, my analysis drew on the information derived from the letter to the CEO, and it followed the process of understanding the data, defining the purpose, and then categorizing the data, and then connecting the dots of the data, and then interpreting the data into meaning. My analysis concluded that the letter served the purpose of the employees, and that through this letter, an understanding of the magnitude of the situation by the CEO was realized. And although he had to make some hard decisions to steer DT into the right direction, he did so by protecting jobs and increasing service levels so that everyone could be retained and prosper in the future. Hey, it's a harsh reality sometimes that you have to make decisions to save a company, but I think he did both. I think he saved jobs while saving the company, albeit some had to accept lesser wages and work longer hours. But in the end, maybe they'll get that money back and maintain their jobs. In closing, as stated by Michael Patton in his 1990 book, working with qualitative data is a rich and enlightening experience. The more you practice, the easier and more rewarding it will become. So my opinion of this is that it is an accurate quote because this process has been very difficult for me to understand. But as I continued, I found out to be quite enjoyable trying to analyze and connect all the data and then define the meaning. I also found that this process helped me frame my ideas and was conducive to my content analysis progression as a researcher. So in closing, thank you very much, Dr. Gibson. I learned a lot during this class, and I look forward to future classes with you. Thank you.